Hello and welcome to episode 297 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as a few times now with my colleague Chris Lomas, who is standing in for Jason Rabinowitz today, who's, I think, as we're recording in Stockholm, Sweden, on a CRJ 550. So I think we're getting the better deal of it today.
Someone's got to be.
Yeah, 6 a.m. flight out of LaGuardia, I think. Though I don't feel bad for Jason, because as we talked about on last episode, he spent the week in Taiwan and Japan. So I feel
very little sympathy.
No sympathy whatsoever. But he'll be back next week. But Chris was thankfully happy to join. I didn't have to twist his arm too hard. So, Chris, welcome back to the podcast. It's always great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here again, and for the first time in the same room. I don't
exactly.
think we've ever been in the same building, in fact, or the same country.
That's true. Every time you're on the show, you're well and truly in the woods somewhere. Yeah. So Chris and I, along with most of the rest of the Flight Radar 24 crew, are in Stockholm this week, having our annual get-together. We're doing all sorts of, I believe you were doing some training today that involved a whole mess of Legos. So
you'd be surprised what you can learn with,
there you go.
With Lego.
So that's good to hear. And we're headed to curling later. We've got the annual Yule board later, along with all sorts of good year-end wrap-up stuff. So let's start there. Let's wrap up the year as far as Flight Radar 24 is concerned and the work that you've done this year. What stands out in your mind?
I guess two things really for me. First of all is seeing the A321XLR come into service. I think we've been very fortunate to follow that aircraft from very early on in its journey. So there's some earlier episodes of AvTalk where I've talked about it. We also spoke to Gary O'Donnell, the head of the program. Really interesting. And of course, we joined a test flight last year too, which was incredible. So it's really satisfying to see that journey sort of come to fruition. And I guess the other thing, which we haven't shared publicly yet, is an experience that I had a few weeks ago, courtesy of our friends at Airbus. We took a flight on the Airbus A400M and flew around the middle of Spain with the door open. And
no one tossed you out the back?
No one tossed me out the back. No, so there was a struggle, but I prevailed. So,
well, good. I'm glad. So look for that video in the coming weeks.
Indeed.
We can also preview what I think we tend to have some of the best video content that we produce. It happens at the end of the year. Our colleague Gabriel is currently in Antarctica. He flew down on the A340 earlier in the week and has been flying Basler BT-67s. None of us here are jealous. I would never say that, but I think we're a little jealous.
We're in an interesting range of locations for this recording. You and I are in the room together for the first time. Jason is on a CRJ. And Gabriel is in Antarctica.
Yes, and
all we need is a member of the team on the moon for the next episode, and we've got the whole shebang.
Well, anything's possible at this point.
Hello, SpaceX. We are available for
for a moon launch. So stay tuned for those videos as well. Let's turn our attention to Poland, where we started the week in a most unexpected manner, and that was with a young couple in love, the soon-to-be groom, coming up with a very interesting way to propose marriage. He rented a helicopter, and they flew the flight path that said, "Marry me," included a heart, and then he had his girlfriend pull out her phone and check Flight Radar 24.
Which I think means technically we proposed to her.
That's what I'm saying. And so this actually counts as the second time that we have proposed marriage to someone using Flight Radar 24, or the first time that they saw the proposal. Last October, there was a couple in the UK that used one of the Emirates A380 flights out of London as a special message to propose. So she said yes on both accounts.
Both accounts,
She said yes. That would be the worst.
It will be an expensive rejection.
Yes, very, very expensive.
I was thinking how it must be a lot easier to do these things in a helicopter, particularly where you're writing out actual letters.
Right.
Because in a fixed-wing airplane, that's a lot of turns.
You would be flying a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Unless you're doing it in kind of like an extra 300 or something, and you're just whipping it around the sky like the Red Bull Air Race. Yeah, that's a little bit easier. But
that'd be fun too. But yeah, so the happy couple, we don't know when the date is, but we assume everyone at Flight Radar 24 is invited to the wedding.
100%.
Other things where thankfully they have said yes. The ITA Airways Lufthansa deal has officially been greenlit by the European Commission. So that allows Lufthansa to take a 41% stake in ITA Airways and eventually probably end up owning the whole thing outright, the way things are going now. The competition that acquired the remedy slots is what we thought it was going to be all along, but they've been officially approved. So EasyJet acquires the remedy slots for the short-haul flying, and Air France-KLM and IAG, the other two major airline groups in Europe, acquire the long-haul remedy slots out of Italy. EasyJet has wasted no time and said, okay, we'll base some aircraft there. So 5 aircraft will be based out of Milan and 3 aircraft will be based out of Rome. So it's good to finally get this done.
Over the line. And I guess EasyJet are pretty well established in Italy as it stands. I think they've got a good experience of operating at both of those bases. I'm pretty sure they're both EasyJet bases.
Yeah, so more aircraft and off we go. We'll see how it ends up working out as Lufthansa Group tries to fold in ITA Airways. And as Jason mentioned a few weeks ago, we're in a battle to get the Alitalia brand back. So we will not rest.
We all want to see it.
We will not rest until the Alitalia brand is back.
What would be really awesome is if they could bring the Alitalia uniforms back, because I don't know if you've ever seen an Alitalia uniform, but there's a lot going on. They are a very busy. Large hat and very busy. That's a great way of describing it.
They are busy. Also bringing back the old Alitalia China from the old 747 days.
Yes.
Just bring back the 1970s back. Yeah, just bring back the 1970s. Problem solved.
Oh, we love to see it.
Where are we going next? We're going to Russia. Well, we're not going to Russia, but we're going to talk about Russia. In August, the Russian government changed the law that, for the first time, allowed the wet leasing of aircraft, which up until the announcement that they were changing the law to allow wet leasing of aircraft, I had assumed that it was not illegal.
I was also not aware of this.
This was one of the things where the making it legal was the surprise.
Absolutely. And I guess the moral of the story is, if you don't like a law, just change it.
There you go.
Simple as that.
Well, we'll talk about why that's difficult later in the show. But as far as this goes, well, it's Russia. So they wanted it, they got it. Aeroflot will begin wet leasing 3 A330s from iFly. It's not clear exactly which A330s those will be yet, but it sounds like the A330s will be used mostly for trips to the Far Eastern airports in Russia. So long-haul domestic flying for them. In Pakistan, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency has said, okay, we're satisfied. You've cleaned up your act. Your safety management system is fine, and your airlines can begin operating back to Europe. This comes after the 2022 crash in Karachi and the subsequent scandal where we found out that some upwards of half the pilots' licenses in Pakistan were fraudulent.
It's incredible, as someone who has a commercial pilot's license, and to think how difficult it was to get a legitimate pilot's license. I can't figure out whether it would be easier or harder to fake one.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think you can just go Microsoft Word, print it off, fold it into half and then into 3 and be done with it. But maybe that's how it works in Pakistan.
Clip art. Got to use some clip art. Definitely.
I guess the wingdings would be a giveaway, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would. Heavy. The little cartoon-shaped aircraft used it as a seal.
If the airplane has a smiley face, it's a fake pilot's license.
That's a good way to tell. Does it have the raised lettering? If it does, you're okay.
Legit.
So this affects Pakistan International Airlines and Air Blue. Both of those airlines can now begin offering services, though neither has, as of today, on the 4th of December, announced that they are starting services back up. Level, the airline that was not an airline but was within an airline and then got moved to within another airline and then was moved to a third airline, but kind of sort of became an airline but was never quite an airline, is now going to be an actual airline.
So that's Airline.
You followed all that, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was Airline to the power of 8.
Something like that.
Yes.
It wasn't as convoluted as June, the lovely Air France invention that should have never happened.
Having seen the movie, I think everything named June seems to just be generally quite convoluted.
Fair enough. So Level's going to have its own AOC, or has received its own AOC. It's no longer under Iberia's tutelage. Technically, they're AOC, but they were kind of operating flights that could have been Iberia flights, but maybe weren't necessarily a good fit for Iberia. It's the market segmentation run amok. But as soon as they get approval to operate to the United States, Chile, and Argentina on their own, they plan on beginning service to New York, Boston, Miami, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, and Santiago. So, I mean, all of the destinations make perfect sense for who Level is and where they're flying from. So look for some, they're not necessarily new flights because they've operated them in the past, but they'll be more levelly.
More definitively level.
Yes. Yeah. So there you go.
Maybe they'll be flown at sea level. Maybe that's the...
In a chronoplan?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I mean, we've wanted to see them come back for a long time.
That would be fun.
A great opportunity.
Oh. There you go back to Aeroflot, wet leasing aircraft. Or,
Quite
or
literally
watercraft.
a wet lease.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. I like it. Speaking of water and other things, including fire retardant, this is an interesting one. And I'm surprised it hadn't happened before now, but I guess there's a ton of studying that you need to do to make sure that it's feasible. But Neptune Aviation, the Montana-based wildfire fighting company, and Aerotech and Concept, which is a French company, are partnering on the first Airbus A319 firefighting jet. So that'll be interesting. I'm excited to see what they come up with. Neptune currently operates a fleet of BAE 146s, which, Chris, you are pretty familiar with.
Something of an aficionado
yeah.
Of the 146. Yep, it's one of it's a personal favourite, I would say, and I've had the privilege recently to climb around a few special use 146s, including one in the UK, which was really interesting, and hopefully we might get to do some work with those guys in the future and show you that. But I think I'm kind of in two minds about this because I'm also a bit of a fan of the A319. I think it's a good, stable platform, and I'd be very interested to see it used in this capacity. And I'd love to see how the conversion process works. You know, we think about passenger to freighter. How do we do passenger to firefighter? Yeah. That's what I'd like to see. And I think the 319 could prove to be a really good platform for that. You know, it's a shame perhaps to see a few more 146s leaving the sky, but, you know, we move.
Yeah, I will say that Neptune says that they're going to have a mixed fleet. They haven't said what the mix will be and how long the 146s will stay around, But they're not going away yet. And also, it's going to take a few years to get even the first A319 into service. They're planning for introducing this in 2027. So it's still a few years off. But the A319 will carry 4,500 gallons of fire retardant. And because of larger fuel tanks, it will have a longer range and longer time on station than the 146. So that's pretty interesting. And I mean, we've talked about it over the past couple of weeks with Colson operating their 737 Fireliners and getting Part 125 certification so they could carry passengers. So this seems like it would be, you know, something along the same lines where you can bring firefighters with you in the A319. So maybe you leave some seats in, but then again, you have to start running an airline. And I'm not sure if Neptune wants to do that, but it seems like it would certainly be an option.
Feels like an adjacent kind of situation.
Yeah. The one thing that we don't know yet is where the A319s are coming from. So that'll be a big question. But it sounds like Airbus is on board with, you know, supporting the project. So that I think that's a big first step to making sure that the aircraft are cared for in the long term. That'll be fun to see. An A319 just climbing hills and dropping fire retardant and all sorts of, you know, good fun stuff.
Very cool to see.
That twin engine large air tanker thing is as the DC-9s kind of reach the end of their useful life, and the 747 sadly is gone and has been converted just back to a regular freighter. So that'll be interesting to
On the
see.
topic of firefighters, I recently learned that the Airbus A400 is going to be made available with firefighting capability. And as I understand it, it's a fairly simple process of you fly your A400 into Seville, you stick it into the hangar. It takes about a couple of days, I think, to convert it. Really fast process. It's quite kind of modular. And then they fly it back out and you've got a firefighter.
Oh, cool. The C-130 has that as well. What is it? It's literally called the Modular Aerial Firefighting System. And it's basically a shipping container that you plug. Yeah, you plug into a C-130.
It's like putting an AA battery into a TV remote.
Exactly. If only it were that simple. But that's cool to hear that Airbus is working on that. Hong Kong's third runway is officially open.
Hooray.
That only took 10 years, but it only took 10 years. Having been a veteran of the Chicago runway wars of the early 2000s, getting a runway built on land is no small feat. getting another runway built on an island that doesn't yet exist. All the more impressive. So major capacity boost to Hong Kong, and they're up and running. And hopefully the maps will be updated by Google and Apple very soon so that we can begin showing that properly and no water landings.
Yeah, please don't tweet us.
Yeah, exactly. We promise we'll update them as soon as humanly possible. Korean Air says that its merger with Asiana will close before the end of December. They've given up a bunch of things. Asiana's cargo business has been sold off. They've given up some routes to T-Way Air, and the European competition regulators have said, okay, yep, that's good. We're satisfied now. The US is expected to give its approval, and that should be the final international regulator that needs to approve anything before they can close the deal. So Korean Air says that they are confident that that will happen before the end of this year. No word yet on if this week's events in Seoul will have any impact on that.
Right.
Nor is there any word if this week's events in Seoul will impact SAS launching its Seoul service next year. Though it's funny how you always find a local angle to a story. We're sitting in Stockholm. The Swedish Prime Minister was supposed to visit South Korea this week. That's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
There
may not be a prime minister.
Well, or president. Yeah,
president, yeah.
Exactly. We'll keep an eye on that. But things seem to be, as far as the aviation angle is concerned, things seem to
felt like a pretty quick flash of fire
okay.
on the aviation side. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll follow that in case there's anything else to report. We now come to the point of the program where I get to apologize to all of our listeners for not knowing how to read.
Nobody's perfect. The
Royal New Zealand Air Force has indeed operated C-130Hs for decades. And they've flown to Antarctica for decades. What I got wrong was that they took delivery of their first C-130J, and that's the first time that particular aircraft has gone down to Antarctica.
Right, so we're talking about the J to Antarctica. First time, simple as that.
Exactly, and I spent more time last week being wrong. I do want to say thank you to all of the people who emailed us this week. I'm pretty sure most of New Zealand listens to the podcast, were told about it, and decided to write in. So thank you, everyone from New Zealand, and a few people not from New Zealand who apparently have a very strong interest in C-130s, letting us know.
Two highly engaged communities, which we've
exactly.
We're happy to
Venn
reconnect
diagrammed
with.
them.
Yeah.
Exactly. So glad to clear that one up. And regarding the conversation last week we had about the Swift Air crash, we had someone from Flight Calibration Services write in who mentioned that when in our discussion we talked about how the Polish Air Navigation Services Agency sent one of their calibration aircraft to Vilnius right after the crash to perform an ILS inspection. And the aircraft was headed there anyway, and they mentioned that the mission had changed following the crash. And someone from Flight Calibration Services, which does the same thing on a contract basis for other organizations, mostly in Europe, mentioned that this is procedure anytime a crash occurs and that aircraft is using the instrument landing service.
Right. So even if
instrument landing system or any instrument approach.
Gotcha. So even if the instrument landing system or whichever instrument system isn't directly implicated,
right,
it still has to be.
They will come and do a calibration just to make sure that it did not have anything to do with it. It's working properly. It's working exactly as it should, and they can rule that out.
Gotcha. Do we know what aircraft they do that with?
So the Poles used, I believe it was a Beech King Air. And I think Flight Calibration Services uses Beech and some Pilatus aircraft as well. But we can look that up and stick it in the show notes.
Let's take a look.
We've done some good stuff. Their flight paths are always fun to look at.
Absolutely. I'd say that's another common tweet.
Oh, absolutely.
What's
this aircraft doing?
What is this airplane doing?
That was one of the first explanatory blog posts I wrote when I started at Flight Radar, a decade ago. When we got, a long time ago, before we had as good a coverage as we did, it was, where did this aircraft go? Why did it disappear? What is this aircraft doing when it was, doing bad transponder stuff before ADS-B had really started to roll out, explaining MLAT, and then it was, what are these patterns?
I feel like a good guide is if it's either going in a constant circle or if it's going up and down.
Yeah.
It's doing some kind of beacon or approach calibration.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if it's a perfect circle.
Yes, absolutely.
Those are always fun to see.
Do head to the blog and check that article out.
Well, toss a link in the show notes. Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up was we talked about the delivery of Emirates' first A350 a few weeks ago. We talked a little bit about it last week. And again, we have a strong listenership, apparently, among aviation finance professionals, which is fantastic, and a few lawyers. And not only did they offer some helpful explanation by way of what was happening, but even more so, I got homework, and that was fantastic. So the discussion started with they flew from Toulouse to Dubai via the UK, flying through UK airspace. And we knew that this was a requirement for the financing. But I asked the questions, why is it a requirement for the financing? And why is it still, why have we not done away with this? And as is often the case, it all comes down to lawyers and judges and one particular case. And in this case, it's a court decision that affected a leasing vehicle, a special purpose vehicle that was designed to lease or own Boeing 747-400 and Mahan Air, which was or is an Iranian airline. And the legal machinations are interesting, and I'll put a link to the law review article that I read through.
Some bedtime reading.
Yeah, exactly. But the long and the short of it is the aircraft made its way to Mahan Air when it wasn't supposed to. The special purpose vehicle, Blue Sky 1, wanted the aircraft back. And because the contract was written in England, they went to English court to argue over this. And the judges said, no, you can't get it back because there wasn't a security instrument created. You cannot use this particular aircraft. You didn't do it right. And so you can't use this particular aircraft as collateral for the mortgage. So you're not getting it back.
Right. Okay.
So because no one wants to lose an aircraft, especially one that's hundreds of millions of dollars, euros, pounds, what have you, that's why they continue to fly through the UK.
Quick trip to the northwest and then...
So the explanation is basically boils down to we want to make sure that we have a valid contract so that we can repossess the aircraft if anyone stops making payments, or if somebody seizes it, we have a legal claim to it so that we can get our aircraft back. And the amount of money we spend on the jet fuel to fly from wherever up to the UK
is going to be way less.
That's less than because there are ways to do the contract in a way that you don't have to fly through the UK, but that would cost you more in legal fees. So it's the cost of the jet fuel versus the cost of the legal fees and the headache, and maybe this will be fine, maybe it won't be fine. And so they know that if they fly through UK airspace, they sign the paperwork while the aircraft is in UK airspace, they move on.
Right. Well, first of all, I have no questions. I thought that was a perfect explanation. I totally get that. And as we have learnt from Russia, if you don't like a law, just change it.
Yeah. And as it turns out, it's much more difficult to change a law when you have to involve Parliament and there are competing priorities.
That makes sense.
And it doesn't seem like this is a high priority for folks in the UK. Yeah. So there are the explanations. And that's the episode. We've got a short episode today. Lots of traveling, lots of busy. We need to go get ready for curling.
We do.
Is what we need to do.
I think it involves putting a jacket on, mostly.
And a helmet.
And a helmet.
And a helmet. Yes, helmets are required. So if neither Chris nor I are doing the podcast next week, and it's just Jason sitting here by himself,
we have not.
You know that we did not survive curling. But we'll be back with a new episode next week, and then as we wind down the year, we're both getting closer to episode 300 and getting closer to our annual clip show. So we'll have some good stuff around all of that at the end of the year. But until then, this has been episode 297 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here today with
Chris Lomas. Thanks, Ian.